Okay, so we'll start with a little bit of context about what this workshop is, and I've called it Freedom from Anxiety. And the reason I called it Freedom from Anxiety is because I found that you really can have freedom from anxiety. And my journey with anxiety starts when I just personally used to experience quite a lot of anxiety myself. I mean, I was one of the most anxious kids in school. And even when I was an adult, even though it was a young adult, I was so anxious that I couldn't go to the shop to buy my shopping because I would just be so worried about what people would think of me, which is funny to me now because as if the checkout person is going to look at someone and think something about them, even if they do, who cares? But that was in my consciousness, so I couldn't do that. And I had social anxiety. I had a bit of OCD. Um, I mean, I had it all. I mean, the only thing I haven't ever had is a panic attack, although I have worked with about 5,000 people that have had panic attacks. I've never personally had one myself. Closest I've come was when I was in a race and I was doing a triathlon and I jumped into the water to swim and I couldn't breathe because I was so excited. But I've worked a lot one-on-one with anxiety. I've been working one-on-one with people since 2007, now 2024. So I'm rubbish at maths, but it feels like a long time. And what I very quickly discovered in psychotherapy was that I was teaching people tools and techniques to manage anxiety. And I just, for a while, thought that was normal until I thought that that wasn't normal. Until it occurred to me, well, hang on a minute, why are we teaching people to manage anxiety? Why don't we actually just try and get rid of it? And here's the thing, I was at one point for 4 years a senior lecturer in cognitive behavior therapy. And again, I was teaching my clients, but also my students, how to help other people to manage their anxiety. And it completely stopped making sense to me. I really, why would you try and manage something? Why not just eradicate it, get rid of it? And that's when I really got kind of turned off psychology and started getting into something called transformative coaching. Because what I discovered was a way that you really can have freedom from anxiety. Like it's not some fancy title to get you to come to this workshop. It really is possible. And I'm living proof. Like I'm someone that was so anxious, I could do anything now, and I can sit here and authentically say that anxiety never gets in my way. And the experience of anxiety doesn't bother me. I don't struggle with it anymore. And I know that when I work with a client one-on-one, particularly in the recent days, because I've seen more and more very recently, anxiety isn't a thing for them anymore either. I was working with a client, last week, and they brought their struggles with anxiety. And we went through a process, which I'm going to go through some of it with you on the call today. This isn't going to be a one-on-one coaching session, but some of it with you guys today. And I said, how does the anxiety look now? And they said, it's not there. Not, oh, it's lighter, oh, I know what to do, but it's just not there. So what we're going to be looking at today, we're not looking at tools and techniques to help you manage your anxiety. What we're going to look at is what is true about the experience of anxiety. So what does that mean? It means that knowledge is power. When you understand how something works, you know what to do about it. When you know how to play the game, whether that's a board game or a computer game or the game of life, you know how to play it and you function better and you feel better and you perform better. So what we're going to be looking at today is what is true about anxiety. And sometimes I talk really fast and sometimes I pause for a minute just to see if there's anything else there that I want to share with you guys. Yeah, I guess what I'll share is I truly believe that when you understand anxiety, when you understand what's creating the experience of anxiety, it completely transforms your relationship to anxiety. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So the next place we'll look at is we need to look at what anxiety is. So the experience of anxiety, it feels quite uncomfortable, right? Like everyone has experienced anxiety, even if you're the most confident person in the world, everyone's experienced anxiety. You might call it anxiety, you might call it feeling nervous, you might call it panic, you might call it feeling on edge. You might say, I worry. So the experience of anxiety feels uncomfortable. I'm not going to go into the boring scientific bit about fight and flight. Like I'm sure you guys will know that. And if you don't, you can look that up really easy. Like we're beyond that. But the experience of anxiety is an uncomfortable one. It doesn't feel good. And then we worry. So you've got different components. You've got an emotional component that feels like physical sensations in the body. You've got the thinking. You've got the worry, which is thinking, but it's a behavior. And then anxiety, if you don't know what it is, can really limit you. People will say that anxiety is crippling. People will say that they can't have a good life because of anxiety. And I used to say those things as well, so I get it. So we're going to look at what anxiety is, and we're going to look at shifting your awareness, shifting your consciousness so that you understand what anxiety is more and more, so that you literally experience it differently. It's kind of like this, right? If I come home and my wife has the TV on and I see images of London being bombed and I see Big Ben's fallen down, crashed down, whatever. And I say, oh my God, what on earth has happened? And I'm really panicky and I can't believe the terror that's on TV. And then she starts laughing and she says, it's a film. Because I thought I'm seeing the news, but what she's watching is a film with, it's a set. She's not bothered about what she's experiencing because she knows it's a film, it's a movie. Whereas I'm having this is a funny time at the moment to speak about it because there's riots and shit going on, so that could happen. But if I think it's real life and I'm watching the news, I'm going to have a totally different experience of that. But because she understands in that moment something that I don't understand, her experience is different. That's what we're going to go be doing with you guys, shifting your understanding of anxiety. So you can watch this back as many times as you want because I'm going to probably go through this fairly quickly and take some questions. But what I feel really comfortable promising you actually is that if you really get this and you really apply this understanding, you won't need to look anywhere else for dealing with anxiety. I mean, you might want to take things deeper, but there's nothing else to do once you really get this. So as best as I can tell from my extensive research, and we're talking nearly 20 years of research, there's 3 levels to understanding anxiety, and your understanding of anxiety is directly related to how much it gets in the way of your life. So level 1 understanding of anxiety is when people say, I'm anxious. And you've probably all done it. I've done it before. If I've literally worked with people that have said, I'm anxious. That's just who I am. Now I get it, but the problem with that is if you are identifying as a character of anxiety, you have absolutely no way to get any freedom from it because you think it's who you are. And I posted a reel about this on Instagram yesterday, I think. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, and I haven't seen the new one yet, Inside Out 2, but the first one, Inside Out, there's a girl and there's these characters in her mind, and the characters play the role of different emotions. So you've got joy, and you've got sadness, and you've got fear, and you've got anger. Inside her head, there is a character called fear, called anxiety. So it is playing the role of that. And sometimes it takes over, and then you experience anxiety. But if you describe yourself as someone that is just anxious, that's who I am, that limits you so much. You're never going to be able to get away from an experience of anxiety because you literally think it's who you are. And the funny thing about this is, and I've had this as well, is we get really attached to who we think we are. If you think about, say, your values or your beliefs, whether it's like religion or politics or whatever else, people will say, I have strong beliefs about that. I have strong values. What they really mean is they're really attached to them. And the funny thing about how our psychology works is we get attached to what is familiar to us, not what is helpful. So if you ever describe yourself as I'm anxious, you're literally saying to yourself, that's just who I am. And that's going to really get you stuck. So stop doing that. That's level one. Level two of an understanding and awareness about anxiety is seeing anxiety as emotions and thoughts, but seeing it as an actual thing. In other words, you're making it into something that it's really not. And you do that. This is where most people are, by the way. Most people are at level two. You do this when you say, oh, I'd really like to do that thing, but I can't because I'm anxious. Oh, I really would like to give that talk. I really would like to go for that promotion, but I can't because I'm scared I'm not good enough. It doesn't look like anxious thinking to you at times, but it is. When you treat anxiety as a reason that you can't do something, you make it into a solid, fixed, real thing. And at this level, you're really unclear about where the experience of anxiety is coming from and what it actually is. And this is where I would say even I was 6 months ago. I would say I would still do things that made me anxious, but I would say, oh, I'm anxious about this, I'm anxious about that, as if it's a thing, as if it's a real thing. This is where most of us are. And this is when I discovered that there's a third level of anxiety. And this is where it's at. If you can understand this level and you can live from this level, anxiety won't bother you again. And this level is the level of seeing anxiety for what it really is. All anxiety, whether it's OCD or generalized anxiety or panic disorders or anything like that, is all created by the power of thought. So when I was a lecturer, I would diagnose different people's anxieties as different disorders, which is a horrible word to describe an experience of something. Because if I then label you as saying, well, you've got this anxiety, you've got that anxiety, and you've got that anxiety, you start to live into that. And you will say, well, I've been diagnosed as this, so I am this. That's a really, really limiting way of viewing something because it fixes you as that thing. The only difference between, and I feel qualified to say this because I am a trained psychotherapist, although I've let my registration expire because I don't do that anymore because I don't find it helpful. The only difference in different anxiety disorders is different thinking. If someone has OCD, they're having thoughts about contamination or control or checking that this is turned off and that this isn't going to go wrong. That's just one way of thinking about yourself and life. If someone has panic attacks, they're just having thinking around, this means I'm going to die, this means I'm going to faint, this means I'm going to have a heart attack. They're just thoughts. If someone's got anxiety around, it's called hypochondriasis or illness anxiety disorder these days, their health basically, they're just having thoughts about scary things happening to their health. All anxiety is created by the power of thought. So if you're ever feeling anxious, 100% of the time, it's created by thought. But when you're feeling anxious, thought doesn't look like thought. It looks like real life. And this is the trick, right? Is a lot of people, when they experience anxiety, will act on the experience. They will act according to what they're thinking. And what this does is it fixes and solidifies anxiety. So let's say I say to you, oh, I'm anxious about going for a drive. If I then don't go for that drive, that thought about me, presumably whatever was going to happen, crashing or something, seems more real because I'm treating it as if it was real. So the third level of anxiety is seeing where the experience of anxiety is coming from. And it's always coming from thought. I'm not talking about fear. Fear is very different. That is when there is a very real, present moment physical threat. Okay. A fear response is when there is a present moment physical threat to your well-being. That's very different. When that happens, there is no thought, there's just reactions. You'll go straight into your lizard brain and you'll just react, and you won't even know what's going on because you'll actually be in the zone. You'll actually be in the flow state. You won't have thinking. That's fear. We're not talking about that. That's a really helpful thing to have, and we all have it. It's all built into us, and it's very, very rare that you actually experience it. You might have only experienced it twice in your life. One of my best mates is a firefighter. He experiences it every day. Well, actually not every day. Most days he's on shift, but most of us, we don't ever experience actual fear. I have a couple of times in my life, twice maybe. Anxiety is an experience created by thought that gives you feelings. And this is how well your human system is built. You know when you're having anxious thinking because you feel it. Whenever you're feeling anxious or you're feeling dread or terror or nervous or an edge or that butterflies in your tummy or whatever it is, those feelings are designed to let you know, oh, I must be having scary thinking right now. So your feelings, your emotions, the sensations of anxiety are designed like a smoke alarm's designed to warn you, to alert you. I'm using my thinking in scary ways right now. All anxiety is you imagining a bad future that you don't want to happen. And you're experiencing the fantasy of that future. All anxiety is experienced in the present moment. All anxiety is to do with an imagined future. Again, a future that you don't want to happen. That's what anxiety is, always. This is what's true about anxiety. For any person that's got an anxiety disorder, which don't exist, they're not actual things, it's just a way to describe different thoughts about anxiety. And anyone that's ever experienced nervousness about exams or job interviews or first dates or public speaking, yeah, you're having scary thinking about something. You're painting a picture with thought of something you'd rather not happen. And you're experiencing that as if it is happening to you now, and you're feeling the emotions of that. And if that is true, which it is, your only job is to see when you're doing that. There's no tools or techniques required. If you can raise your level of awareness, raise your level of consciousness to see, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm feeling anxious. I'm having scary thinking about a future that I don't want to happen. When you know that you're doing it, you can choose to stop. You don't need any tools or techniques or distraction methods. And you will get caught up in thought again. I did it. Best recent example I've got of this is my wife and I were watching a really immersive series on TV. And you know it's a good series where you get so immersed in it, you forget that you're watching TV, or at least you think that you're watching real people. And this guy was beating up his wife on TV. And it was a series, so they're actors and actresses, right? And I was shouting at the TV. And my wife said, don't forget he's just an actor. And I was like, yeah, I know, but he's doing this. But in that moment, I really didn't know that he was just an actor. I know I said I know, but I really didn't know. I got caught up in the series because it was a really good series, and I love that. And I love going to watch a film, and we pay more money to go to the cinema than we do to sit at home because it's a more immersive experience. We love to have experiences, and all anxiety is it's an experience entirely created by the power of thought that we'll get caught up in. And yeah, you're watching this workshop, and I'm kind of giving you the best I know about anxiety, but you will still get caught up in it. I do. And then what will happen is you're like, I'm literally sat here right now on a Tuesday afternoon having scary thinking about something I don't want to happen. And I'm feeling my thinking 100% of the time. It's just how our psychology works. We don't feel situations, we feel our thinking. We don't feel truth, we feel our thinking. All of our feelings come from thought. And thought is a really funny thing because it looks so real, because in a way, it is real. When we talk about what's real, thought is real. So really our only job in managing anxiety, it's not really managing, but seeing what anxiety is seeing what is thought and what's not. Like if there is something going on, like let's say someone's been made redundant or whatever, they're out of work, that's what's going on. But that's not where the anxiety is coming from. Anxiety is coming from the thought. And your only job is to see what's thought and what's not. And that's not even really a job, because the more present you are, the more grounded you are in presence, in the moment to moment life itself, the more obvious it's going to be what's thought and what's not. And also, when you know that your experience of anxiety comes via thought, you're going to be less bothered about when you're feeling anxious because you know it's just thought. And this doesn't get rid of your intelligence or common sense. Sometimes when I say things like this, people are like, well, what if your son's walking out in the middle of the road and you're just going to let him walk? No, because I'm not an idiot. In fact, when my son was 2, he did walk out into the road when there was a car coming. And I did what anyone would do, is I went and got him out of the road. But I didn't need anxiety to be able to do that because my common sense tells me if there's a car coming, he's in the road. But you don't need an experience of anxiety to move you, to motivate you, to act intelligently, to take precautions. I used to lead walks out on the coast. And one of the things I had to do for insurance purposes was a risk assessment. And we were walking next to the edge of cliffs sometimes. And I had to do a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is basically think about some of the things that could go wrong and how you're going to deal with them if they do. Well, one of the things that could go wrong is someone might fall off the edge of a cliff. Like that might happen. So if that actually happened, I mean, I don't know what I'd actually do, but I had precautions in place to say to people, don't walk too close to the edge of the cliff. There's a cliff there. I mean, that I had to put that in my risk assessment. I mean, I don't know, but I just think that's common sense. There's a cliff. I don't want to get too close. I mean, we've all probably been idiots at times, but most of the time we have our common sense available to us moment to moment, right? Being present doesn't make you stupider, it makes you cleverer. The more present you are, the more intelligence and wisdom you have access to. The more present you are, the more creative you can be about challenges that you do come across. Anxiety doesn't mean anything other than you're having a scary thought about something. It's when we make it mean something that we go down to the second level and we turn it into a thing, as if it's a reason for not doing something. And it's a really strong feeling sometimes. I honestly think that one of the times I felt the most anxious in my life was when I was on my way to my first date with my wife. I was so scared. There was so much pressure that I'd built up in my mind that my body wanted to turn the car around and go back home and make up some excuse. Because the images I was having in my mind were humiliating. Luckily, on some level, I knew that those images weren't real, they were just images. And I got to the first date. And 6 months later, we moved in together, and now we've got 2 amazing kids. But if I'd have given into that anxiety, I wouldn't be able to hear them in the background going mental about their bath time. So much of the time, we want something. Our heart, our soul is telling us that we want something, and we give in to the thoughts of fear and worry and anxiety, making them real things. And that, by the way, is the worst thing you can do if you want freedom from anxiety. Because if you give in to your anxious thoughts, it perpetuates the cycle of anxiety. In other words, it makes it more real. If I have, if I or you have an anxious thought about something, bad happening and you act on it, you end up then developing thinking about your anxious thinking. So things like, oh, I was really right to be worried about that, or the world really is unsafe, or people really are scary. It's like if you've got an interview coming up and you do days and days and days worth of prep because you're anxious, like I'm not saying prep is a bad thing, but I'm talking about over prepping, then you end up developing a thinking about your anxious thinking. In other words, it's just as well I prepared so much, because otherwise I wouldn't have been able to do it. Another way of saying this is don't reinforce anxious thinking, because if you reinforce anxious thinking, it becomes more solid and fixed and real. The more you act on your anxious thinking, or don't act, as the case might be, the more real it seems to you. Really, a lot of this comes down to maybe a couple of things. One is seeing how well you're made. Your human being system is designed in such an incredible way that you know instantly if you're having anxious thinking or not, because of how it feels. And that's amazing. Like, anxiety is literally designed to feel crap so that you stop doing it. Because it feels horrible, right? Like, I don't like it. Well, I can be free to experience anxiety, but I'd rather not. I don't like it. And my feelings tell me, oh, Chris, you're doing it again. You're having scary thinking about that thing happening that you don't want to happen. Oh, yeah, God, I'm glad that I'm here right now and it's not actually happening and that's just a thought. That's just presence and grounding. That's how well you're made. It's amazing. Anxious thinking doesn't mean anything other than anxious thinking. And I think that's all I got. I think I'm going to take some questions in a minute, but I could make this more complicated. But someone wise once told me that the simplest you can make something, the more it creates understanding. And I believe that understanding is power, knowledge is power. I mean, I used to make anxiety really complicated. When I would train my students, I would do a whole day on OCD and a whole day on health anxiety and a whole day on every different type of anxiety disorder that was in the book, the diagnosis and DSM, diagnostic and statistical manual. And we made it really complicated. And all we ended up doing was learning how to help people manage anxious thinking, but we didn't help them see that all they were doing was managing anxious thinking. What we were helping them do was manage their anxiety disorder. When you really see that the only thing you have to manage is how present you are and how much you can see that it's just an anxious thought. That's it. And I want to set some expectations. What I don't expect is that you'll come off this and you'd have nailed it. Because thought is the most addictive thing in our world, you will get caught up in anxious thinking again. You just will. I do. But once you've really seen this, you can't unsee it. And at some point, you'll stop forgetting that it's just anxious thinking. And so there's no tools, there's no techniques. If there was a practice, it's just to practice being present, which you already are. It's what you're made of. It's your most natural state. And to see thought for thought. That's it. And that is as simple as I can make it. And that is as simple and as complicated as it needs to be. I mean, you're welcome to kind of continue this conversation one-on-one with me, for example, but you don't need to, because all we're going to be doing is deepening your presence, deepening your grounding into what's thought and what's not, and helping you see where you're not seeing its thought. And it really does look like something scary to you, and you're not following your heart. Which, I mean, I do all the time in my one-to-one. I'm not diminishing the power of one-to-one coaching, but you really don't need it. Because all we're going to be doing is taking you deeper into presence, seeing what thought really is. and helping you have freedom from the experience of anxiety, because it's just thought. Who cares? Thought's not anything other than thought. And what is thought? Thought is the power of imagination. It is the paint through which you paint your experience of life and have it reflected back to you. Thought is the medium, the energy through which we have an experience of life itself. That's the power of thought. When we talk about reality, what we're actually experiencing in our reality is thought. We don't experience situations, we don't experience life. What we experience is our thought being reflected back to our consciousness.